When people think of Sharia law, they think of stonings, amputation, beheading. It's usually associated with capital punishment. And in Britain, Sharia law has a much more sort of mundane interpretation. It's about marriage, divorce, custody, probate, and how estates are divided after someone's death. And when the Lord Chief Justice and the Archbishop of Canterbury have spoken about Sharia law, I think what they're calling for is a regulation of these practices in Britain to make sure that they fit British law as well.
The rights of women. There was a case recently where a man died and the inheritance was had been agreed in advance that the inheritance would be decided by a Sharia court. Now the Sharia court gave the sons twice as much as the daughters, because that's what happens under Sharia law. Under the English courts, they would have all been given equal amounts. Because they'd agreed in advance to have it decided by Sharia law, that was enforced. But obviously, people are concerned that it's incompatible with our values to have a system like this operating at all.
Some people say that the Sharia law is incompatible with the human rights legislation in Europe today. But earlier this year, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, said that some parts of it would inevitably come into practice. So we've come to London today, the multicultural, multi-ethnic capital of the UK, to investigate it for ourselves.
I mean, Sharia law is already here. When people get married, when Muslims get married, they always have a religious ceremony. That religious ceremony is carried out in accordance with Sharia law. So my sister got married under Sharia law, my brother got married under Sharia law. All our Muslim friends, regardless of how religious or observant they are, got married under Sharia law. So it's already here, it's already been happening for decades, but somehow people think Sharia law means physical establishments, having judges and courtrooms and witnesses and juries. And it's not that. I think what people want to have is that any decisions that made are under Sharia law are also recognised by British law. So for example, if you marry under Sharia law, that marriage is valid under British law, because at the moment it isn't.
So what happens sometimes is that Muslim couples get married under Sharia law thinking that they have a valid marriage, but actually they only have the same rights as cohabitees rather than man and wife. So you can follow Sharia law, but it won't necessarily be enforced by the state. Now, the significant change is that in the 1990s there was an act called the Arbitration Act, which allowed tribunals to operate alongside our law. And that's how the Jewish courts operate, and they've been operating for many years, the Beth Din. And under that act, Sharia courts do now operate in this country. How it works is that they're still subordinate to the courts, the English courts. So, for example, a man and a wife can agree to have their disputes settled by a Sharia court. They both have to agree. If they do agree, then when they have a dispute, the Sharia court will settle it, and that can be enforced by the other courts. But the English courts will never enforce anything that's incompatible with English law.
Today is Friday in London. As you know, it's a very important day for the Muslim population. So we've come here to the London Central Mosque to have a chat with the people as they come out of the prayer session.
I don't think you could entirely enforce Sharia law without probably compromising some bits of UK law. But like the Archbishop, I think, spoke about some time ago, it's about marriage and these kind of issues. There probably is some room of flexibility. It would be up to, obviously, the legislatures and the Parliament here to decide whether or not that's the case.
As far as to the extent of marriages go, there's no harm in helping accommodate for that, because I do understand that Jewish practices are also accommodated into the law, and I think it's perfectly compatible. Obviously, full Sharia law is not understandable, but otherwise there's no harm.
Without knowing too much about it, it would be difficult to comment without saying anything that would be unjust or unfair. So
you can explain and teach and, discuss and try and, because you can learn from it. I mean, Sharia law is not a bad thing, obviously, in my opinion, completely. But you should learn from both cultures, and therefore end up with something a bit better rather than try and force one or the other to be the absolute.
Well, we don't really follow the Sharia law, even though we follow Islam, because it's not really practical. And in Muslim, what the Islam says is you have to follow the law of the country you're staying in. You don't necessarily have to follow Sharia law as such. So I personally don't follow it.